The majestic ancient Rome of Emperor Hadrian's reign in the year 130 AD, when the empire reached the height of its territorial and cultural glory. Most people today, upon hearing the name of this great city, immediately picture snow-white marble temples, majestic, spacious squares, and the armor of invincible Roman legionnaires glinting in the sun. However, this glossy image from history textbooks does not at all reflect the harsh, incredibly dirty, and frightening reality that the vast majority of ordinary residents faced on a daily basis. For 1 million of its ordinary inhabitants, the real Rome was a dark, stinking, and incredibly noisy labyrinth of endless narrow streets, where every new day felt like a grueling battle. If a modern person were suddenly to find themselves in these harsh conditions without much money or influential connections, their attempt to survive would end after just a few agonizing days. Life in this gigantic human anthill demanded incredible physical endurance and a complete renunciation of any modern notions of basic personal comfort and sanitary standards. Unlike our modern, peaceful era, the ancient city had no quiet green parks, safe pedestrian zones, or reliable municipal water filtration systems. Every breath you took carried the risk of catching a severe lung infection, and every step on the slippery cobblestones threatened serious injury that local doctors simply could not treat. Your ears would constantly suffer from the rumbling of wooden wheels, the shouts of street vendors, the curses of drunken sailors, and the cries of hungry children, all echoing through the narrow stone corridors. The noise, the filth, and the constant physical crush would drive your nervous system mad, leaving you no chance to relax or enjoy a long-awaited moment of quiet solitude. Our detailed account today will immerse you in the very heart of this terrifying ancient reality, stripping away the beautiful historical facades and revealing the brutal truth of everyday life. We will examine every aspect of a Roman plebeian's existence in detail, so that you can fully experience the horror and hopelessness of being at the very bottom of the imperial food chain. You will literally smell the acrid stench of the slums, hear the deafening nighttime clatter of carts, and feel the bites of thousands of hungry and ruthless bedbugs on your skin. This historical reality will prove far more terrifying, complex, and filthy than any modern adventure film or gripping novel about brave gladiators and wise senators. The time has come to learn, in all its chilling detail, why you, a child of the comfortable 21st century, would certainly not have lasted even a single week in the slums of Rome. Your new home in the Roman slums would be an insula, a gigantic ancient apartment building that loomed over a narrow street like a rickety brick mountain. These overcrowded multi-story residential buildings rose skyward due to a catastrophic shortage of land in the capital and the constant influx of thousands of desperate new migrants from across the empire. Greedy developers cut corners on absolutely everything, using the cheapest and poorest quality building materials, raw wood and poorly fired, crumbling bricks. Such massive buildings often reached 6 or even 7 stories in height, despite all the official imperial decrees prohibiting the construction of buildings taller than 20 meters. They constantly creaked, swayed menacingly in strong gusts of wind, and looked as if they were ready to collapse right on top of you at any second. The daily climb up an incredibly steep wooden staircase to your rented cubbyhole under the very roof would be your first serious test of physical endurance. The steps were narrow, uneven, rotten from constant dampness, and covered with a slippery layer of compacted mud brought in on the soles of hundreds of residents. Natural light barely penetrated here, so you often had to climb in pitch darkness, carefully feeling out each step with your hands and feet. As you climbed the stairs, you would constantly stumble over discarded trash, homeless vagrants sleeping on the landings, and shards of broken earthenware. Many tired or intoxicated residents often fell from these steep, dark staircases and broke their necks, never making it to their cherished sleeping spots. There was practically no furniture in your room, as no poor tenant could afford to buy a proper wooden bed or a solid table. You would sleep right on the floor, having tossed an old, dirty linen mattress stuffed with stiff, prickly straw and dry leaves into the corner. This mattress would literally be teeming with hordes of aggressive bedbugs, large fleas, and mites, which would happily pounce on your fresh, unfamiliar blood. Every night, these tiny blood-sucking insects would mercilessly bite your body, forcing you to scratch your skin until it bled in vain attempts to relieve the itching. Your hands, back, and legs would quickly become covered in painful red blisters, and the constant lack of sleep due to your nighttime torment would rob you of the strength needed for your daily work. Roman insulae had absolutely no internal sewage or plumbing system for residents living above the building's first stone floor. Your room had no sink, no toilet, and no drain, so all natural bodily functions had to be performed under appalling, unsanitary conditions. You had to use a standard clay chamber pot, which always stood in the corner of the room, filling the tiny, unventilated space with the heavy, nauseating stench of urine and feces. When this chamber pot overflowed, its contents were often simply flung out the window to save time and effort, directly onto the heads of unsuspecting nighttime passers-by. This is precisely why any walks beneath the high windows of the insulae after dark were considered an incredibly risky endeavor, requiring constant vigilance and quick reflexes. Cooking hot food in such cramped quarters was an extremely dangerous process and was invariably accompanied by thick, suffocating smoke and the risk of fire. You would use a small portable bronze or clay brazier on which you would try to cook a meager stew of cheap beans and stale bread. The acrid smoke from burning damp firewood or cheap charcoal had no way of escaping outdoors due to the lack of proper chimneys in the rooms of the poor. It quickly accumulated under the low ceiling, making your eyes water and your throat ache from a dry, painful, and incessant cough. The walls of your tiny room would very quickly become covered with a thick layer of black, greasy soot that would stain your clothes and hands at the slightest accidental touch. The constant, paralyzing fear of the building suddenly collapsing would drive you mad every time the wooden floorboards creaked under your neighbor's feet. Due to poor quality building materials, dampness, and the constant overloading of the upper floors, the walls of ancient insulae were often covered with deep cracks and lost their load-bearing capacity. Many Roman satirists and writers of the time regularly mentioned the terrifying roar of residential buildings suddenly collapsing as a completely ordinary occurrence in the life of the capital. Escaping from the top floor during the sudden collapse of dilapidated structures was physically impossible. People simply found themselves buried alive under tons of broken brick and dust. You would fall asleep every night with the chilling thought that this sleep might be your last, and your bed would turn into a mass grave. The concept of personal space in a typical Roman insula simply did not exist as such. You were always in the thick of other people's problems, sounds, and smells. The wooden partitions between adjacent rooms were so thin that you could hear every word your neighbors whispered in the middle of the night in detail. Every day you would hear the loud snoring of old people, the endless crying of hungry babies, the sounds of marital quarrels, and the moans of seriously ill people dying behind the wall. The distinct smells of someone else's burnt food, unwashed bodies, and unemptied chamber pots freely seeped into your home, blending into a single repulsive, foul-smelling cocktail. In such incredible cramped conditions and constant stress, any minor domestic conflicts between neighbors instantly escalated into violent fights involving knives and stools. Stepping out of the dark entrance of your insula onto the street, you would feel no relief, because Subura would greet you with unbearable filth. The streets in the poor neighborhoods of the ancient capital were incredibly narrow, crooked, and almost never cleared of the foul-smelling urban trash that had accumulated there. Because of the upper floors of buildings, balconies, and clotheslines hanging over one another, direct sunlight almost never reached the ground. This created the effect of a constant gloomy tunnel, where it was always damp, slippery, and smelled of rotting organic matter, regardless of the time of day or season. Your soles would instantly sink into a sticky, squelching sludge consisting of liquid mud, rotten vegetables, horse manure, and discarded human waste. The olfactory shock on the streets of Subura would be the ultimate test for your modern, spoiled nose, accustomed to deodorants and fresh air. The sharpest and most irritating smell was the thick aroma of old urine, which emanated from the numerous workshops of fullers and laundries, known as fullerniks. The fullers collected urine from all over the city, left it to ferment in large vats in the sun, and then trampled dirty clothes and wool in it with their feet. This chemical ammonia stench stung the eyes, took your breath away, and clung tenaciously to the hair of anyone who was careless enough to walk past such workshops. Combined with the smell of cheap fried lard from street eateries and the aroma of open sewage ditches, this cocktail would induce constant bouts of vomiting. Death and decay were an utterly commonplace part of the visual and olfactory street scene in any overcrowded, impoverished neighborhood of the ancient metropolis. The corpses of stray dogs, dead pack mules, and slaughtered livestock often lay right on the roadside for days on end until they were eaten by rats or cleared away by slaves. In the intense summer heat, these bodies would instantly swell, burst, and begin to exude such a monstrous putrid stench that people would faint. Sometimes, in the dark corners of alleys, one might even stumble upon the abandoned bodies of dead beggars or discarded unwanted infants that no one intended to bury. In ancient Rome, there were no special sanitation services in the poor neighborhoods to quickly clear the streets of this biological nightmare. Street vendors added their own unbearable cacophony to the chaos, making your eardrums vibrate from the constant din. Every vendor considered it their duty to shout down their competitors, hawking hot sausages, cheap wine, fortune-telling services, or dubious medicinal herbs. Their piercing shouts mingled with the clang of metal tools in open-air workshops, where blacksmiths and coppersmiths pounded their anvils with hammers right by the roadside. This endless, psychologically oppressive industrial and human noise did not cease for a single second throughout the long and exhausting daylight hours. This sonic pressure would very quickly give you the most excruciating migraine, from which there was no escape, neither on the street nor in your room. As a result, the streets of ancient Rome were not a place for pleasant strolls, but an aggressive, toxic, and deadly environment of survival. Every time you left the house, you had to mobilize all your body's physical and psychological reserves just to return alive and unharmed. You would return to your dark little room completely exhausted, dirty, angry, and reeking of every possible waste product from the vast human anthill. Your nervous system would be working at its limit, constantly scanning the surrounding space for flying pots, pickpockets, and rabid dogs. This endless daily stress would destroy your psyche much faster than physical illnesses would destroy your unaccustomed body. If you think that with the onset of the saving darkness, life in the ancient metropolis would come to a standstill and give the poor a chance to rest, you are deeply mistaken. It was precisely at night that the streets of Rome turned into a veritable acoustic hell because of the famous law of Julius, which prohibited the movement of commercial carts during the day. This law was enacted to at least somewhat relieve traffic congestion, but it shifted the entire traffic collapse to the hours meant for sleep. As soon as the sun set below the horizon, thousands of heavy wooden carts entered the city, loaded with building stone, huge logs, barrels of wine, and sacks of grain. The sound of their heavy wooden wheels, bound with rough iron, bouncing over the uneven basalt slabs of the pavement, resembled the ceaseless rumbling of thunder during a violent storm. This monstrous mechanical roar was amplified by the echo in the narrow stone corridors of Subura, causing the walls of your dilapidated insula to vibrate continuously and menacingly. The famous Roman poet Juvenal bitterly complained in his satires, for even a herd of sea lions would die of insomnia from this nighttime noise in Rome. In addition to the clatter of wheels, the air shook with the furious shouts of the drivers, who mercilessly cracked their leather whips, urging on their weary mules and cursing their clumsy competitors. At narrow intersections, the carts constantly collided, their axles snagging together, braking, and completely blocking traffic, which led to massive and incredibly loud, profane arguments between the drivers. Trying to fall asleep amid this industrial roar was an utterly hopeless task for someone accustomed to modern plastic windows and a well-soundproofed bedroom. the notion of the inevitability of justice at night completely vanished, leaving you face to face with the primitive law of the jungle, where only the strongest and most ruthless survived. Constant, severe sleep deprivation due to this nighttime chaos would become the most destructive factor for your physical and mental health in the slums. The human brain, deprived of proper rest for several nights in a row, begins to malfunction, causing hallucinations, panic attacks, and the deepest paralyzing apathy. You would wake up every morning with bloodshot eyes, a splitting headache, and a complete lack of strength for hard physical labor. Your reaction time would be catastrophically slowed, making you an easy target for pickpockets during the day and an inattentive worker at risk of serious injury on a construction site. Insomnia would slowly but surely kill your will to live, turning you into an obedient, exhausted zombie, indifferent to your own fate and suffering. The only dubious refuge from the nighttime noise for the poor was the cheap and very sour wine sold in the numerous local filthy taverns. Many residents of Subura drank themselves half to death every evening just to shut off their consciousness and sink into a heavy, unhealthy alcoholic stupor right on the floor of their room. However, such quantities of low-quality alcohol rapidly destroyed their livers, caused severe dehydration, and led to terrible morning hangovers. Waking up with a pounding headache to the shouts of street vendors starting their work at dawn, you would feel much worse than you did before trying to fall asleep. This vicious cycle of sleep deprivation and alcohol poisoning was a daily reality for hundreds of thousands of people trapped in this ancient stone trap. Morning in Subura began long before sunrise, robbing you of the last precious minutes of that precarious morning calm and fragile silence. Even in the pre-dawn twilight, the artisans would wake, and the air would fill with the ringing clang of blacksmiths' hammers, the screech of saws, and the creak of potters' wheels right beneath your windows. Teachers in cheap street schools would begin, in unison, to make their students recite long Latin texts, shouting over the noise of the last night carts passing by. Bakers shouted out the prices of fresh hot bread, while herdsmen drove herds of mooing cows and bleating sheep right through the crowd to the meat markets. The city was waking up at a frenzied, deafening pace, forcing you to immediately rise from your hard straw mattress and join this endless, exhausting race for survival. This brutal 24-hour cycle of noise pollution would forever change your perception of silence as a basic human need and an inalienable right. You would realize that in the great ancient Rome, silence was the most precious and unattainable commodity, one that only the owners of luxurious country villas could afford. For the poor, sound has always been synonymous with stress, danger, hard labor, and the impossibility of escaping the intrusive presence of thousands of other sweaty and angry people. Your ears would constantly ring, and any sharp, unexpected sound would make your heart clench painfully from an instinctive animal fear. You would pray to the gods for deafness as the greatest blessing, just to stop this endless, brain-crushing acoustic terror of the ancient metropolis. In the end, a night in the Roman slums did not bring the long-awaited relief, but became merely another, darker and more dangerous phase of the daytime nightmare. The noise of carts, the threat of robbery, the shouts of drunks, and the lack of proper sleep destroyed the poor man's body just as effectively as hunger or infectious diseases. You would have spent your first night huddled in a corner on a hard mattress, shuddering at every rustle and dreading the onset of another agonizing day. And that first day would have seemed incredibly easy to you compared to the suffering that every subsequent hour in Subura would bring. Your psyche simply wouldn't be able to withstand this constant pressure, which never lets up for a single second, forcing you to surrender to the mercy of a cruel fate. Life in a wooden and brick Roman insula was marked by a constant, blood-curdling fear of a sudden nighttime fire that could destroy everything in a matter of minutes. Fire was the most terrifying and merciless enemy of the poor neighborhoods, as open flames were used everywhere for lighting rooms, heating and cooking. Rotting floors, straw mattresses, wooden furniture, and an abundance of cheap oil in lamps made multi-story houses ideal fodder for the all-consuming red rooster. All it took was for a single drunken tenant to carelessly drop a burning lamp on the floor, and the dry wood would burst into flames instantly, cutting off the escape routes for residents on the upper floors. Fires in Sabura broke out almost daily, and entire vast neighborhoods could burn to the ground, leaving behind only mountains of smoldering black ash and charred human bones. Roman fire brigades, known as vigiles, patrolled the city streets at night with buckets, hooks, and axes, but their efforts were often completely futile. With no water pressure in the hoses or fire hydrants, the only way to stop the rapidly spreading flames was to tear down neighboring wooden buildings that had not yet caught fire. The vigils simply broke through the walls of adjacent houses with their heavy pikes to create an empty space and deprive the fire of further fuel to feed on. If a fire caught you on the 6th floor, no one would risk climbing the burning staircases to rescue you. You would be doomed to a terrible death in a fiery trap. People, in a panic, jumped out of windows directly onto the stone pavement, preferring instant death from the impact to a slow and agonizing burning alive in their rooms. In the summer, the problem of thirst became critical, as the sweltering city sucked all the moisture out of the human body through profuse sweating within a matter of hours of work. In your sweltering attic room, the water stored in a jug quickly heated up, becoming warm, musty, and doing absolutely nothing to soothe a throat inflamed by dust. To wash, you had to use the bare minimum of precious moisture, simply wiping your dirty, sweaty body with a damp rag soaked in cheap vegetable oil. In the summer, the problem of thirst became critical, as the sweltering city sucked all the moisture out of the human body through profuse sweating within a matter of hours of work. In your sweltering attic room, the water stored in a jug quickly heated up, becoming warm, musty, and doing absolutely nothing to soothe a throat inflamed by dust. To wash, you had to use the bare minimum of precious moisture, simply wiping your dirty, sweaty body with a damp rag soaked in cheap vegetable oil. The sensation of constant, sticky, itchy grime on your skin, which could not be washed away with a stream of clean, cold water, would drive a modern person mad. You would constantly dream of a simple sip of clean, ice-cold water and a cool shower. But these luxuries were available only in wealthy homes behind high fences. Fire and water created a paradoxical double trap in the Roman slums, where you could simultaneously suffer from intense thirst and burn alive. During major fires, the lack of water on the upper floors made it impossible to extinguish even the smallest blaze in its early stages. All you could do was grab your bundle of meager belongings and run down the smoke-filled staircase in a panic, jostling neighbors who were just as terrified. Many enterprising speculators, such as the famous wealthy man Marcus Licinius Crassus, bought up burning insulae for pennies right in the midst of the fire, offering to extinguish them on their own only after the deal was done. Your life and your home were nothing more than cheap, expendable materials in this cruel game of the elements and insatiable human greed. Washing clothes in the absence of clean water became a real problem, which the poor solved in the least hygienic way possible. As we have already mentioned, fullers used urine to clean wool, but if you didn't have money for a laundry, you had to wash it yourself. You would try to scrub away ingrained dirt in the murky water of a fountain, using coarse sand or ash instead of soap, which had not yet been invented. After such a wash, the fabric became incredibly rough, scratching the skin until it bled, and continued to emit the sour smell of half-washed, stale sweat. Clean, soft, and fresh-smelling clothes were an unattainable marker of high social status that forever separated you from the Roman aristocratic elite. In winter, cold water became a real ordeal for your hands, covered in deep, bleeding cracks from hard physical labor and constant dampness. As you drew water from an icy street fountain, you wouldn't feel your frostbitten fingers, and the heavy, cold clay jug would constantly slip from your hands. Heating water for washing was too expensive, since firewood in Rome was a precious resource saved for cooking the most essential meals. You would have to endure icy washings every morning, your rotten teeth chattering from the cold in your dark and gloomy little room, exposed to the elements. This constant struggle for basic physical comfort would wear down your nervous system day after day, leaving no time to reflect on high art. Ultimately, fire and water in ancient Rome would have demonstrated to you your absolute pitiful helplessness in the face of an aggressive natural world and an imperfect infrastructure. You would live in a state of constant stress, constantly sniffing for the slightest whiff of smoke and carefully conserving every murky drop of warm water at the bottom of the jug. This exhausting, endless battle for the most basic elements of existence would leave no room in your soul for anything but primal fear. You would very quickly realize that the romance of ancient Rome is just a fairy tale for naive tourists, and that real history reeks of smoke and a murky, stagnant puddle. That is precisely why no modern person could endure even a few days in this merciless reality without going mad from the strain. The culinary reality of the Roman slums would be a brutal ordeal for your stomach and taste buds, which have been spoiled by modern flavors, sugar, and flavor enhancers. Forget about juicy steaks, fresh green salads, chocolate, and aromatic morning coffee. Your diet will consist of the cheapest, blandest, and hardest to digest foods. The main source of calories for hundreds of thousands of Roman plebeians was the free government grain distribution, the famous annona, which saved people from starvation. Once a month, you would stand in a huge, stuffy, and frazzled line to receive your lawful portion of coarse wheat, often spoiled by mold. This wheat still had to be ground and taken to the baker, who, for a few small coins, would bake you rock-hard, dark bread. Fresh meat would appear on your meager table only on major religious holidays, when priests distributed the remains of sacrificed animals to the crowd. On ordinary days, your body would suffer from a catastrophic lack of high-quality animal protein, subsisting mainly on boiled beans, chickpeas, and tough old cabbage. This incredibly heavy carbohydrate-based diet would cause constant bloating, chronic digestive problems, and severe, unrelenting intestinal pain. The lack of fresh fruit and vitamin C would quickly lead to the development of early-stage scurvy. Your gums would start to bleed, and wounds on your body would stop healing. Your stomach would always be bloated from the beans swelling it up, and your face would take on an unhealthy greyish-yellow hue due to a diseased liver and poor digestion. Instead of water, which was deadly dangerous to drink from the filthy fountains, you would quench your thirst with posca, the traditional drink of legionnaires and the urban poor. Posca was a cheap wine vinegar, heavily diluted with water, sometimes with the addition of herbs, or a pinch of salt to mask the stale taste. This sour, stomach-corroding drink was excellent for beating the summer heat and killed some bacteria, but it tasted like window cleaner. Real sweet, aged wine was the privilege of the nobility, and you would have to make do with a young, quickly souring, cheap substitute made from the worst grape pomace. Constant consumption of this acid would have completely destroyed what remained of your tooth enamel and triggered the development of a painful stomach ulcer within the first few months. Street food at Thermopolia, the ancient equivalents of modern fast food joints, was a distinct form of extreme gastronomic Russian roulette. In these dirty, smoke-filled establishments, where food was served from clay pots built into the counter, they often sold sour soup or fried meat of dubious origin. Butchers, without a shred of conscience, would grind up old donkeys, stray dogs, or animals that had died of unknown diseases to make cheap sausages. The lack of refrigerators meant that meat left out in the heat would become covered with a layer of green flies and begin to rot dangerously even before it hit the hot griddle. Food poisoning after a meal at such a street tavern was an absolutely common occurrence, resulting in severe vomiting, bloody diarrhea, and sometimes even death. The atmosphere in these dive bars also did little to promote peaceful digestion and relaxation after a hard, exhausting day's work on a construction site or at the port. Thermopolia were always packed with dock workers, prostitutes, drunken sailors, and pickpockets who ate with their hands straight from shared, greasy clay bowls. You would sit on a dirty wooden bench in the semi-darkness, listening to obscene cursing and the clatter of dice, and watching fat rats scurry under the tables in search of crumbs. If you tried to complain about the quality of the stinking meat, you'd simply be beaten with fists and thrown out onto the filthy cobblestones amid the loud laughter of the regulars. You'd have to eat your disgusting portion in silence, greedily swallowing the pieces and constantly glancing around to make sure no one stole your food right from under your nose. Chronic malnutrition and a deficiency of essential micronutrients would make your body incredibly vulnerable to any respiratory infection, even the mildest ones. Your immune system, accustomed to modern sterile supermarkets and vitamin supplements, would simply shut down after a week of eating stones, vinegar, and rotten fish. You would constantly feel incredible weakness in your legs, severe dizziness when getting up quickly from bed, and an inability to concentrate your thoughts. A strict diet would have dried out your body, turning you into a thin, stooped shadow with sunken eyes and protruding ribs covered in dirty grey skin. Survival required the constitution of a workhorse, which the poor Romans acquired as a result of the harshest natural selection from their earliest starving childhood. As a result, the Roman plebeian's table was meagre, hazardous to health, and unbearably repulsive to the taste of any modern civilized person. The culinary extremes of Subura would leave your stomach no chance, triggering severe flare-ups of chronic illnesses you didn't even know you had. You would slowly waste away from exhaustion, unable to afford even a simple piece of fresh boiled meat or a handful of sweet, ripe apples. This diet of sand, vinegar, and fish guts would be the final nail in the coffin of your short and agonizing Roman life. You would die in a fever, cursing the day you traded your modern, boring world for the exoticism of an ancient historical era. Studying the brutal daily reality of ancient Rome in the year 130 CE mercilessly shatters any romantic illusions about the grandeur of the ancient era. The life of an ordinary person in the overcrowded slums of Subura was a concentrated form of endless physical and psychological suffering for the sake of mundane daily survival. You would be surrounded by incredibly foul-smelling filth, deafening, maddening nighttime noise, a constant, bone-chilling fear of fire, and complete social powerlessness. Your unaccustomed body and pampered mind would be utterly unprepared for such a level of constant, aggressive pressure from a hostile urban environment. You would not be able to find a single moment of peace, a single breath of fresh air, or a drop of genuine human compassion in this gloomy stone sack. The colossal contrast between the glossy pages of modern history textbooks and the real stench of sewage in the streets would cause you the deepest cultural shock. Your modern immune system, lacking basic evolutionary immunity to local strains of dysentery and malaria, would collapse within the first 3 days. The lack of hygiene, bites from thousands of fleas and bedbugs, harsh bland food, and poisonous lead-contaminated water would quickly reduce your body to a state of complete exhaustion. The psychological trauma of having to live by the brutal, primitive laws of the street, where the strong always prey on the weak with impunity, would finally break your will. You would find yourself a completely helpless, alien, and unwanted creature at the epicenter of the most powerful and ruthless state of the ancient world. The remarkable historical resilience of the Roman plebeians themselves commands genuine respect, given the nightmarish conditions in which they were born, toiled, and died. These people possessed a phenomenal natural resilience, forged through the high infant mortality rate that ruthlessly culled all physically weak or sickly individuals while they were still in the cradle. They knew how to find joy in the simplest and most basic things: a sip of cheap, sour wine, the victory of their favorite gladiator in the blood-soaked Colosseum, or a piece of pork on holidays. However, for you, a person accustomed to individual rights, antibiotics, and soft pillows, this level of stress resilience would be completely unattainable. You simply wouldn't have time to adapt to this harsh environment, becoming yet another nameless victim of this insatiable, gigantic human anthill. Death in the Roman slums was completely anonymous, mundane, and devoid of any religious pathos or the respect for the deceased that we are accustomed to. If you died of illness in your dark little room or bled to death in a filthy alley, your body would simply be thrown into a communal open grave outside the city walls. No one would have arranged a beautiful funeral for you, erected a marble slab with a touching inscription, or sincerely mourned your untimely death. You would simply vanish into the stinking sewers of the imperial capital, ceasing to be even a statistical unit in the complex reports of powerful Roman officials. This terrifying prospect of the complete, merciless erasure of your identity would be the most dreadful realization in the final moments of your short Roman life. To sum up our detailed historical investigation, we can state with absolute certainty, modern humans are completely ill-equipped to cope with the realities of the ancient world. The time machine so often dreamed of by science fiction writers would, for most of us, be nothing more than an expensive and complicated one-way ticket to a veritable hell on Earth. By studying history through the prism of the smells, sounds, and tactile sensations of ordinary people, we begin to truly appreciate those incredible achievements of civilization that we take for granted today. Hot water from the tap, clean bedding, and the absence of bedbugs are humanity's greatest historical victories, won for us at the cost of our ancestors' immense labor. That is precisely why you would certainly not have lasted even a single week in the slums of ancient Rome, breaking down under the unbearable weight of this filthy, yet truly great era.